Welcome back to the Consultancy Growth Podcast. I have the genuine pleasure of being joined by Richard Brackstone today, who has a very interesting career history when it comes to management consultancy. He's currently the managing partner of Moorhouse Consulting, but also a member of the board of directors at the Management Consultancies Association.
Thank you very much, Joe. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Could you give us a bit of background about your journey to Moorhouse and how you ended up there?
Sure. So potted history, universities, I went to three. I traveled for 3/4 years. I taught, so I taught in a state school, Bishop Stortford, and rose through the ranks pretty quickly in terms of responsibilities that came my way. And then thought, well, if I don't jump from this, I will end up forever in education and no doubt down the headmasterly route. So I stepped out and did an MBA, and I did an MBA at Cranfield School of Management. I didn't know anything about management consultancy when I went into that course. There were 170 people on it, and I, from a lowly quote unquote teaching background, had a very rapid learning curve. But I started to understand projects and programs and mixed teams and getting involved with various industries. I joined Andersen Consulting, who were also sponsoring our rugby club in Cranfield School of Management. And then I lived within Anderson's that then morphed into Accenture. So it was that very late 90s into the start of this millennium. So I was there for nearly 4 years, and then essentially got headhunted out by one of my clients in government. So I went and worked in government for nearly 10 years in total uh, across two big departments, and worked in transformation director roles and COO roles, and broader before I got into those titles, program delivery, campaign management, and everything that comes with working in central government. Those were the days of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, huge transformation programs, and I was right in the middle of those. And then, as the coalition government came in, and as ever, consultancy stroke interim cuts, I came out of government and went back into financial services, which is where I started in Accenture, and went and worked at Lloyds and ran the PPI program there. I think I was the operations commander of 18 billion, I think, was our budget, and eventually paid
Wow.
out. And one of the people I had worked with in the MBA was at Moorhouse Consulting, and he said, "Don't go to a big one, try a little one." And so I did. And 12 years later, I'm still at Moorhouse, and we've gone through some very significant things, from BT ownership to MBO to Xplio ownership, and everything in between in terms of the transition of leadership teams and a very rapid growth journey.
But I'm just interested in those different environments, what helped you do well? Because different environments often reward different behaviors
Yeah.
and different appetites to risk and communication and all the rest of it. So what allowed you to succeed in those very different worlds?
I work with people and I'm drawn to people that I find inspiring or respect, or I can respect who they are and what they've done, and I genuinely think I can learn from. And so coming through the route I described, and coming into teaching, there was a at the time headmaster who I just thought was absolutely brilliant, and I thought if I stick in his space, then I will learn a lot, and I did learn a lot about leadership, about stakeholder management, about change and leading change, and about setting direction, and at times holding firm to that direction, but obviously, taking in the environment that you're working in and how that's changing as well, but still getting things done. And I think that skill set, you build up quite a lot of resilience, I would say, coming through
Hmm.
the career path and some of the things that I've described. You build up a lot of experience about people and how people behave and what motivates people and drives people. Um, and you learn a lot about how to build teams and how to look to get the best from those teams. I've always enjoyed problem solving. I like looking at something, like I think I like all consultants and trying to work it out, but knowing that it's the hardest part is knowing the answer. And then translating the answer. You can actually get to what you think needs to be done very quickly, but actually translating that as to what is done is incredibly hard. And I think the routes that I have taken have given me a lot of experience in
Mm.
stakeholder management and in navigating some pretty complex environments.
Mm. Yeah, it's quite a good general skill set to, I guess, quite suitable for what you're doing now, which requires a fair number of different skills. Good. Okay. So listen, I'm primarily interested in the Moorhouse journey, and Moorhouse is an interesting case because from a I mean, Dom Moorhouse's journey is quite famous now in boutique consulting circles, going from starting to selling in less than 5 years, I believe it was, which is very rare, not always recommended. But if anyone's met Dom Moorhouse, they know the drive and passion that would enable that to happen. Sold to BT. From when, and there was a new leadership team, you said in 2011. You joined in 2012.
Yeah.
Could you give us a little bit of information about just sort of I guess the high level view of when you joined
Yeah.
to becoming sort of managing partner, and I guess how the company has grown over that period?
I will do my best, Joe. I'll do my best. So,
Thank you.
yeah, so I joined a business very much in transition. So you're absolutely right, and the fabled stories of Dom Moorhouse. So obviously sold into BT, and then as ever you sit in a sort of buyout framework and you maintain a leadership team, but essentially that team is transitioning. And so I joined really as the new team had come in, the new exec directors had come in, of which there were three, and they were sort of starting to lead the business. I think at those points, and I've seen it twice now, certainly in Moorhouse, but more broadly in consulting, I see this sort of transition period a lot. It's a very difficult period to navigate. You've got old quote unquote
Yeah.
ways of
Yep.
doing things and thinking, and loyalties, and the way a business has been set up, and it transitions to new leadership who inevitably want to put their mark on it and have different leadership styles and personalities and drive it differently. And so I think that transition period is naturally turbulent. Um, and was in Moorhouse. Um, and so I joined, as I say, towards a year of the team that had been brought in by BT, had been in place, bit less there or thereabouts. So I was experiencing that. That was my first real experience. I mean, firstly, we had some great work. And it was a great culture. That's what really attracted me to it. And as I say, I really enjoyed when I met the leaders. I felt it was a very different entity in terms of SME to some of the other consultancies I'd been talking to. So so that period was a period of consolidation, I would say, in terms of a new leadership team coming in and putting their mark on the business. And of course, the ownership of BT and a large corporate entity, which had bought a business sort of fundamentally to drive some internal programs, because it was, I think, the biggest contract at the time in the sale. But then, how does a consultancy fit within, a corporate that isn't a consultancy, which
Mm.
is essentially, a telco stroke media business. And so again, I think there's always there's a natural sort of point of inflection there as to, well, what is the owner going to do? Are they going to try and look for the synergies and bring the business basically it in and entirely morph it? There are so many stories of where that's tried to happen and failed.
Mm.
and I think will continue to fail, where it's not thought through very, very carefully. So we set out to build a business, um, the Moorhouse business, which obviously didn't have a dependency solely on the owner, and had a far wider spread into private, and public sector clients. And so that's what that period was about. It was about, trying to put a real identity down and different revenue streams, building more resilience. I think, ultimately to set up an MBO. That's what we were doing. And so that period, which was, 2012, 2000, I joined in 2012, so I joined as part of that, into 2015, which was the MBO. And, I think the leadership team, which I joined, were pretty set on that outcome. And therefore, their thinking and planning was around it.
Mm.
And to be honest, when you've got an entity like Moorhouse sat within corporate, and really, the leadership team are pushing in that direction, that inevitably is what's going to happen. Because that's how the business is being set up, and that's how the leadership and the culture is shaped. So that is what happened.
Mm.
And we lived. So we bought, and then lived completely independently as Moorhouse Consulting, for a period of 3 to 4 years. And what happens in that period is it's very liberating. You feel unshackled. You feel that you have complete control of the business. You can take it where you want to. You can make the investment decisions you want to make. You can recruit as you want to recruit. You can structure how you want to structure. And that's exactly what happened in that period. It was a period of change. It's a period where we introduced client directors, junior consultants. It's a period where, our client base shifted, and the fundamental offer that sat and was set up with Dom, which was program delivery, again started to shift into what you'd identify as wider business transformation, because that world becomes increasingly commoditized. It's interesting to see
Mm.
what AI will do with it. But you would imagine even more commoditization, plus the offshoring aspects, and so on and so forth. So that world, is getting tighter and tighter to be profitable. And so, part of that period was about how you built out from a fundamental PM offering, into a wider transformation offering. And of course, in that period, we also set up service lines. So we moved away from just a pure sector perspective and selling work, directly through client relationships, and industry experience and broad programmatics that push change into, a wider business transformation capability. And that was that period. And we grew well, and then looked to sell, and sold, eventually into, a German testing business called SQS, that were looking for, a footprint in the UK. And SQS were bought by A-System, which was a French business. We had a German culture, then plus a French culture. The French A-System was bigger, so essentially took over,
Hmm.
and formed Xplio, and we now sit within Xplio. Um, and again, if I reflect in that period, what happened next? So when you go through an MBO, then clearly, again, the leadership team is tied in for a period. Again, my reflection on that is, it's a period where, because the buyout is fixed, if you like, the price is fixed at that point. Generally, something's paid up front, and then generally, you're paid towards the end of the buyout period. Not a lot happens in my experience, and again, just talking to others, because you're so fixed on the price that you sold for, you don't want to take risk.
That's interesting. Okay.
And so we were, I think, looking back at it, we were in a bit of a holding pattern. And so,
Mm.
when the MBO happened, and we moved into, complete private ownership, it was, as I said, very liberating and energizing. Then after, then we got to the sale, and actually I think it stalled a bit, actually. And we held on to the model that had been built to that point, probably very wise and very sensible in terms of protecting your revenue. but it was a period, if you like, of keeping that structure stable.
Mm,
Gets to the other side of the MBO, which was 2 stroke 3 years. And then, of course, what happened was as we got to the end of that and we got towards, I'm trying to think where that must take me through to a timeline, but at 2021, 2022,
yeah.
then again, we were in a period of transitioning the leadership team because the very senior leaders with the most equity had gone and were going. And we were transitioning. So I came into the managing partner role in that time and I've been in the role. I'm into my fourth year in the managing partner role. Um, and so, yeah, and so I came into that role and we built a very different and a far bigger partnership team and senior leadership team. And we went through very rapid growth, so we coming into and out of the COVID years, we doubled, stroke, tripled, touching tripled in size, and went from a sub 100 business in terms of people to approaching a 300 people business. And so that very rapid growth, was generated through that period, from 2021 through through to last year, I would say. And last year was a very flat year in consultancy, and we experienced
Mm,
that as well.
yeah.
But I think that the 3 years that preceded that were absolutely incredible in terms of how we changed the leadership team, in terms of the number of partners that came in, and the different energy and perspective, how the sector and service line model sort of has come together and matured, how the leadership has matured, how it's widened. We've pushed on the diversity sort of cards as well to create more energy, insight, different personalities, different perspectives. So all of that has gone on as well in the last 3 or 4 years. And of course, that's gone on under Xplio ownership. And I can keep talking for a little bit, but I can sort of stop there as
Yeah,
well.
fascinating. Fascinating. Well, listen, there's a whole load of stuff to dive in there. I'd like to talk briefly about the MBO. I know a few firms that are considering an MBO at the moment. And I'd like to, if you wouldn't mind, just explain what an MBO is, and I guess how it worked for you guys in practice. So I'm not particularly, I don't want to know about the economic side of it. In terms of the structure and the culture, how that changes, it'd be good to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, of course. So an MBO is a management buyout. Um, and so when a business is put up for sale, so in our case, let's say something into 2014, 15, no, there can be a number of outcomes. So clearly at that point, BT owned Moorhouse and they have an asset, Moorhouse, and they want to sell the asset. So it's their decision. If you're the leadership team of a business, you can look to trigger that decision through various ways, but it can, it's quite a dangerous route. Because ultimately, you're owned by a huge corporate and you want to stay on the right side of the leadership of that corporate and the board. So it was actually the BT decision to sell. I think, partly because we as a consultancy did not fit and we weren't part of their core entity that they were, strategizing about and thinking forward. So we became an asset to sell. So two or three things can happen at that point. A PE house can support the leadership team in buying the asset, the business. There's a trade sale. A different entity comes along, which could be a consultancy or it could be any business in industry, similar to what BT did, and buy the asset and buy Moorhouse. Now, the strongest position, um, in theory, is the management team because they know the business, they've built the business during that period, and they are key to the continuing leadership and stability of that business. And so the management team have a strong hand at that
Mm,
point.
mm,
And it then comes to, well, okay, how does it play it and how strong is the hand? And so, without diving into all of the detail, what happened was the management team, broadly four people plus two, if you like, four with the majority of the shares, and two with lesser, bought the business and were able to do so without PE at that point. Uh,
Wow. Okay.
and so it was there was still loan and debt, but it was set up
Mm.
differently. Which again, and again, there's conversations you can get into between PE ownership and what that does.
Mm.
The Xplio are owned by PE, and I can see how that shapes the game. But the great thing about that MBO was it ended up with pretty much entire independence of ownership of the
Great.
asset of Moorhouse Consulting,
Yeah.
which is a brilliant business. And so that's how that came about. And again, I'm simplifying a lot of complex, stressful
Sure.
stuff, and probably sleepless nights.
Yes.
Um, but that's what happened. And so,
I guess from your perspective, or the whole management team, obviously you're betting on yourselves
yes,
when you do this, and P like to see that, of course, but
the
I,
sales price is important, isn't it? If
yeah,
it's too big and you've taken on too much debt
yeah,
to fund it, whether that's through banks, or through PE, more directly. Um, then that plays a part again as to how attractive that is, and
yeah.
whether the management team ultimately want to get involved in it or not.
Yeah, and I also guess in your specific situation, the strategy, the structure you had actually lent itself to expansion because you were doing this very well in BT,
Yeah,
and all you were really saying was, well, let's do this elsewhere, and use the IP and people we've got to do good work, but actually bring in external revenue. So
exactly that. And
it
only the management team really know that,
okay,
really know where you are as a business, and therefore the opportunity that exists. Um, and we felt, there was great opportunity in the market for Moorhouse Consulting as Moorhouse was being shaped, and with some of the thinking that was going on.
okay. Okay, thank you. So let's skip forward. So you developed new service lines, you were external face, you started to bring in some new leaders. Um and you were sold 4 years later
Yep.
to SQS. And again, again without avoiding the sort of with it avoiding the financial details, how did so I think everyone is comfortable with what a sale of a company looks like, but how did that differ from what the last inflection point around the MBO? How did you set up for that? How did you what were things different? How were things different by then?
If people were in different positions, so you had three partners, if you like, that had the majority of the equity, had done a great job in setting up the business, for sale. And so my point being, people were in different places. And so, for me personally, coming through that timing, there was clearly a group that were going to stay,
Yep.
group that were going to go. And then that sort of awkward reality of the 2 to 3 year buyout period where people are going, and setting up their plans and starting to sort of live, a bit of a different life. They've mentally moved on. And so I think that period is difficult, in
I
that
presume.
respect.
Sorry to interrupt. I presume you had. I presume the shareholders at least had earnout targets
Yeah, yeah,
associated with it. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly that, which is 3 years. And so, so during that period, you are literally working out the transition of the leadership of the business. Um, and as I say, I think the interesting reflection point is how quickly you can do that, and in terms of identifying the people coming through, and the readiness of those people coming through. And because, as I say, once you've gone through the transaction, very naturally you're focused, if you like, generally the payments are split. You're focused on the second, the second payment. Your mind is in the business that you sold, in terms of keeping it, at the same sale point,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
you sold it for. But
Yeah.
your mind is also in, okay, what am I going to do next? I've got the money, and that gives you a lot of liberty. what are the things I'm planning to do in this example, beyond Moorhouse. So you live in that period, and I think again it's a really interesting period, for a consultancy SME to go through. Um, and I think overall, looking back on it, and where the business is now, overall, it was done in the right way and not without tensions at the time, because there's bound to be in terms of the environment I've just described.
Mm,
But I think overall, if you look to where the business is now, there was a transition, the leadership changed, and then we got into another period of growth, very rapid growth,
yeah.
which felt very similar to that very initial MBO period when we came out of BT. It felt very similar, and so I do think when there is a way, and clearly I would point to us in terms of our experience of transitioning successfully, and the business not only continuing to be stable, but actually thriving in
Mm,
some of what follows. Because again, people want to put their own identity on it. People have different personalities, and there's another sort of phase of liberty almost, beyond that period of
yeah.
stability where you're waiting for the buyout. And I think that's what happened to us again, with good timing around the markets as well, coming into the COVID period and out of the COVID period.
Yeah.
And yeah, we grew very quickly, and then with so much recruitment, if you like, and so many people coming through promotion and into leadership positions, the business changed very
Yeah. Sure.
quickly. But I believe held on to the values that were core to the setup that Dom Moorhouse, helped put in place all the way back 21 years ago. Those are still the values that we work to and aspire to role model, and I think sit at the very culture of the business that I think you would recognise, and even Dom Moorhouse would recognise.
Isn't that interesting? That's
21
great.
years later, walking into the business, and it's interesting. I speak to some people who have left and then come back for either come back and rejoin, or come back to visit, and they still, can put their hand on and recognize the heartbeat and pulse of the business that they were in, up to 2 decades ago.
It is interesting because it's clearly, I mean, the whole cultural bit and values is often seen as a bit airy fairy, but it's actually an asset. When the way you talk about it, it distinguishes the firm. It keeps people longer. I mean, you've been there a long time now, and it's clearly an asset as well as something that is hard to pin down sometimes.
Yeah, and I mean, I felt the very first meeting I had, in Moorhouse, in the interview I had, and again, and I met a couple of the senior leaders. I felt it immediately. Um, and maybe that was part of just being a small business, but I think again it comes back to the leadership, and the qualities you look for in those people, and can relate to. And I felt it then, and I still feel it now in terms of the leadership team, that's in place currently. And again, as I say, how we aspire to role model and behave and lead the business.
That's great. I want to jump onto a keyword that has come up probably more often than anything else in our conversation, and that's leadership. A lot of the listeners to this podcast are in firms that are around the sort of 30 to 70, 30 to 90 employee mark. And they're on a growth trajectory that perhaps is going to take them to 100 plus. And knowing some of these firms in detail, I know that some of them are looking at their leadership team and thinking, well, listen, you guys have been focused on delivery and we've promoted you because you're great at delivery, and now you're struggling perhaps a bit with sales. Perhaps you're not used to working in a larger, more professional service firm. Perhaps there's a lack of confidence there as well. So I'm very interested in that. I don't know whether it is an inflection point, but there is certainly a period in a firm's growth, even ignoring the MBOs and the change of ownership, where the leadership team becomes more professional, more confident, perhaps more capable. And I'm interested in your reflections on that. So I guess, how does it happen? Um, where do you find these people? Do they come internally? Do you recruit them externally? Um, and how, I mean, clearly Morehouse has done this successfully. So I guess what are the secrets of success of evolving your leadership team during growth?
Yeah, yeah. There's a couple of things in there as well, and again, it's reflection and maybe some learning, and of course, I talk to senior leaders within the SME community. Businesses going from 50 through the 300 point up towards 500. And then, of course, I talk to and work with, the big four plus, and the very senior leadership of those outfits and organizations. So, I think for smaller businesses, one thing, and it's related to this, it's not directly on your point, but I think it's important to sort of, to get your head around this when you're coming through this journey, is actually how you operationalize the business. So when you're a relatively small business, you do everything and the leadership team do everything. And if you're setting yourself up for a sale, you don't necessarily invest in actually how you operationalize the business, what a COO might do, the systems, the structures, the policies. And I think as you get bigger, you as market facing leaders, more often, which is where you want to spend the majority of your time, um, you haven't got time for it.
Mm,
And so those things either get done badly or they pull you back into the business and away from the market in terms of the internal running of the business. And so I do think, and I remember talking to a senior leader, who's taken who's the managing partner of a business that's moved, into the 1,000 mark now from 300 or so. Um, and he was telling me, how it was a crucial and key decision to actually bring a COO into the role, and how he had to take it to the board, and how the board was split because it's a non-market and therefore non-fee paying role. So essentially, you're paying money out and you're not getting money in for that role.
yes.
And he said it was critical to the evolution and growth of the business. And he was the managing partner and had the deciding vote and voted for it. But it was a completely split vote with the board because they just saw it as an outgoing. But I think actually it's crucial. And so setting up your systems and effectively operationalizing your business, I think is a key step in your growth journey. And it takes an investment, and therefore the timing of it is important. In terms of if you're looking to set up and sell, then generally, you're going to run it pretty lean, and take as much profit out as you can. But if you're really thinking about setting up a resilient business for the market and as a consultancy for a longer period, then you really have got to get into a growth journey, and you have to get your operations in place. And I think for
Mhm.
me, that's key learning. It's key learning in terms of what we've gone through, and I'm sure every single business that's going on a growth journey goes through. So I think and I know, as I say, chairs of consultancies as well that are grappling with this conversation. So I think, it's key, and I stick it on people's radars, think about this and think about when you do it and how you do it. But it is absolutely key to growing your business beyond a certain size.
Okay. And do you have a COO? Well, I guess the question is, when did you appoint the COO, your COO role? Or do you not? Are you the COO in effect?
Well, we're moving around that conversation, but
Okay.
and we are looking right now at our internal sort of operating model, for operations. And we could well end up with a COO. At the moment, we've sort of, we've sort of got a head of head of people and talent,
Mm,
a head of finance, and a head of marketing, and so on and so forth. Um, but I can sort, potentially, there's a route towards consolidation um, of those roles. And you've got a COO that then runs the operation of the business, and you, as the senior leadership team, can work on the strategy of the business, where you
yeah.
want to go, what the market's doing, how you evolve and change the business around it, and of course maintaining your relationships and presence in the market. And I think that's a key point in terms of a growth journey. And we're still dealing with it, and we'll evolve it some more, and we might evolve it again sort of beyond that. But I would say in the last 2 or 3 years, in terms of internal investment, we've put a lot towards those core functions
Yeah.
and the leadership of those core functions. So I think, just point to note, and it's not, then you sort of get into how do you build the leadership team, which is your question. So I think that needs to be part of it and part of your thinking. And then you're sort of into, the continuing sort of, it's the classic, run the business, change the business. So then you've got run the business working quite smoothly, and you can continue to evolve and change the business. And I think your senior leadership team has to have, the capacity to do that. Hence my first point. So I think, identifying individuals that are core to the business. So I think firstly, putting the structures and policies in place for clear career progression are important, so that people know that there's a direction into the future of the leadership of the business and that they are part of that journey. So, you've got to do that, and you've got to put a sub tier in place, in our case, below the partnership team, a director team, that you start to expose to the core decisions of the business. So you start to have a more inclusive leadership team, and build up, the understanding and the resilience and the maturity of your leadership team to different reference points and experiences in running the business, but also in a changing market. So I think, you've got your eye on, people coming through continuously in a sort of 24, 36-month cycle,
Mm.
and sort of see people. Now that is then dependent on growth. And if you're not growing, then ultimately, you're sort of like, okay, how do you keep doing
Yeah.
that? And every business faces that in terms of how they deal with that. But we've gone through a very rapid growth period, so we've been able to pull people through, and at the very sort of most senior levels, people have moved on to create space, or we've had the growth to bring people in, into the very senior roles. So I think, a growth trajectory and a growth mindset and a growth strategy
Mm.
is key
Mm.
to incentivizing and engaging everybody in your business, but particularly sort of your different governance levels of leadership, and bringing them through.
Yep.
And I think, as I say, you have to create, or you have to look to create, an inclusive environment where people are exposed to, the key and crucial and critical decisions of running a business.
I really like the principle of, clearly it's not a voting situation, don't get me wrong, but I do like the principle of involving, even in terms of visibility, the team in the goings on of the business. Because I think one of the challenges, especially as you grow, is where juniors see it as a job where they turn up, they take their money, they go home.
Yeah.
And I think emphasizing that actually without growth, it's not a very nice company. Without, clients and profitability, you guys don't get paid and perhaps don't have jobs. I think the more you can expose people to the runnings of a professional service firm, the easier it is to get those messages across that you talked about earlier around business development, around profitability, around growth.
I'm pretty transparent with our financials in terms of where we are, in terms of, that involves revenues, it involves profit levels, it involves what's hot in the market, and what's not. And I think we've got better at that, actually. And again, we've invested in our internal comms. I think it's part of the operationalization of a business. And again, actually, having invested in it, I think we're really reaping the rewards of it, actually, in terms of how we engage with our business and how transparent we are with our information, and
Mm.
making a drumbeat of information that's going into the business.
I'm interested, just a quick one on the people side of things. Obviously, as part of the operations stuff that you talked about earlier, there's the whole competence framework, the training structures, the roles, and all the rest of it. And I get mixed opinions from boutique leaders on the role of HR. Some of them can't stand it. I think this might be a size thing. I think once you get to perhaps 120, you actually realize you might need someone specialized in that area, especially if bad things start happening. So what's your take on the sort of HR director role or HR manager role? When and if did you start taking that more seriously?
I think if you are a people oriented, well, so your asset in consulting are your people. It's when you look at IP and what a consultancy really is, you're buying people and you're buying relationships. You can argue, you can argue on the nuances of that and capabilities, etc. But ultimately, you're buying people and the relationships people have in the market. And so if you're running a people business, then I think the people and talent as we morphed HR into, a number of years ago, is absolutely critical because you want your people engaged. And in a business like Moorhouse, where we espouse our values and we look, as I say, we look to live to them, a structure, you need structures in place and policies in place that reward people fairly, acknowledge people, and show respect to people. And I think you have to have those things in place to build a business. Ultimately, as I say, because people are your asset. So I think take it seriously and take it seriously early, and look for good people in the market that understand consulting. I think if you can find people like that, and we've had people in our business that really do, it makes a massive difference. So you're not just getting pure HR policy and functionality in a business, but you're getting people that understand the demands of being a consultant, and build, if you like, the structures, policies, support frameworks around that. So, I think it's critical. It's a people business. So you've got to invest in that space.
Yes, yeah, yes. I've seen a lot of partners in smaller firms think that they can do the HR bit as well as the marketing bit and everything else, and often you know, they play with it for a while and then realize it actually does need expertise.
I think it comes back to operationalizing the business, Joe. I think when that penny drops, and for some it may not, and for some it may not be relevant, but I think when it drops, it's a game changer.
Richard, I have taken up a lot of your time. I could talk about lots of other things. You've hinted at AI and future growth and things like that and what you're doing now, but I'm wary of your time. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing what you shared. I think there's a lot of lessons there for boutique leaders that are hoping to emulate what Morehouse have done, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Been an absolute pleasure, Joe. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to join you. And I've enjoyed it.
Thank you, Richard.